Hi there and welcome to Lorena's Labyrinth today. I'm Anna Pirelli. If you're a returning visitor, yay, congratulations. I hope you've actually seen all of the videos that we've put up and been able to get some valuable insight on working through your own stuff and raising your personal awareness. If you're a newbie to the channel, I do recommend that although it's time consuming, the videos are time-stamped and you can actually click forward to certain parts of the videos. But I do recommend that you actually look at all of the videos and at least listen to the important parts where the timestamps are, talking about the different thinking styles and how you can work with them and raise your own awareness. Of course, as usual, I will glance over the previous content just as a reminder. So if you've done the videos before, if you've looked at the other ones, just click straight down, go to the description of the video, find the little hot links and go straight to the unhelpful thinking styles, and you'll find the video is much shorter then, I might add. Anyway, getting on with it. So before we get into the unhelpful thinking styles, of course, it's just a good reminder here that when we're talking about thinking styles, quite often people can be either the top-down processor or the bottom-up processor. And what that means, of course, is if people process their thoughts, they feel the emotion first, they recognize an emotion, they can name it, and then they unpack the thought that is associated with the emotional reaction. A top-down processor, of course, feels or they're aware of the thought that creates the emotional response. The other thing to remember too is that with unhelpful thinking is that these unhelpful thoughts are actually generally below the subconscious and we're unaware of them. And so therefore the idea is that we unpack the thought, we find the thought, and then we can replace it, modify it, and address it. And it works, this style or approaches that I'm going to be giving to you, they work for people whether they're a bottom-up processor or whether they're a top-down processor. It's still about finding that key thought, the activating thought. And of course, just a reminder that our feelings are not thoughts, they're not beliefs, they are our emotional responses, and they're related to how we perceive situations and events that happen around us. And a perception is, of course, a thought. It's an idea, it's a belief, and it's totally different from a feeling or an emotion. In the previous videos, of course, we've also talked about the A, B's and C's, which of course is the activating thoughts, the beliefs and the consequences. And this is all part of reflective tools and journaling, if you like, to be able to unpack, to identify that thought that leads to these unhelpful consequences, because that's where we're going. We're looking at changing consequences, stepping into our power and creating the type of life that we want by unpacking these unhelpful beliefs and perceptions and taking a whole new perspective. And this is how we harness the power of our mind. And of course, the process of change occurs through us doing some detective work, which of course we've talked about in the other videos as well. I'm just mentioning it in case we've got people that are watching that haven't watched the previous videos. I do recommend, of course, that you do that first before going forward. But either way, the idea is that, through reflection, we identify the unhelpful thinking, and we then basically either prove or disprove this perception that we've got. We need to ask ourselves some serious questions, which we've outlined here, in an impartial way, as though we're presenting information to a judge or a jury about, is there any validity to these thoughts and beliefs that I have, or the way I'm perceiving this situation? And of course, we've got the string of them there. How realistic are your thoughts, beliefs, and expectations? So this is all part of stepping into mind power as well. So just a reminder, this is the original list that we were looking at with unhelpful thinking styles. You can see here and get a bit of an idea of where we've been, where we're going today, what we're looking at. You've been given a lot of information here. Now, what I'm going to do today is talk about emotional reasoning and the magnification and minimisation. What we're not going to look at is things like the core values. Basically, core values, they are basically your inner mind chatter, and they're formed based on those early childhood years that we have during our early development, and it can be helpful or unhelpful. Now, based on my experience and understandings, I think once we start digging into core values, yes, we can work with that, but it probably needs a little bit more consistent and therapeutic support to actually unpack that. And it could even be doing counselling sessions, like looking at the family units and the roles that people play within the family, especially if it's dysfunctional and toxic. But anyway, for today, let's just kick on. We'll take a look at emotional reasoning, and you can do your research on core values and how to work with those in your own time. So as usual, when I'm doing my research for these videos that I put together, there is a position that's put up by some professionals, some clinical professionals, and they explain emotional reasoning as this capacity to have a feeling or an emotion that quickly trans over to a thought that then becomes a belief. And it can become a belief that is acted upon in ways that are potentially irrational, unlogical, unhelpful, and even harmful at times, because just because we feel something, in the same way, just because we think something doesn't make it true. So the challenge here is to remind ourselves that thoughts are thoughts. Just because you think something doesn't make it true. Might have some substance to it, but we need to investigate it. We need to take a look at that thought and establish, is there anything to support that thought? And the same goes for feelings. Just because we have a feeling doesn't make it true. I mean, all of us will at different times find ourselves in situations where we go, I just have a feeling this doesn't sit right. You know what I mean? It could be that, it could even be this is not going to work out well, it's not going to have a happy ending, but we don't know because there is nothing to support what we are thinking or feeling at the time. And sometimes we might have that feeling based upon, we could turn around and say, well, based upon past experience, my observations, and in my experience, generally when these events link together, there can be an unhappy outcome here. So we would say that's lived experience and lived wisdom. However, it doesn't mean that just because this has happened, that the particular situation where we've got this feeling moving around in within us, we have to allow the conclusion to play out because we can't be sure. Now, I should mention here that feelings sometimes are early warning caution bells. And once again, you take on board what the feelings are, but you look for the evidence in the situation. Now, the only times that I would say it can be problematic to actually do an exploration is actually when people have got paranoia or significant mental health disorders such as schizophrenia. And, like the general thing, if it was you or me that has a healthy fear, I guess, because there has to be a certain amount of fear within our life. Otherwise, we just, that old saying, walk where angels fear to tread. We just walk from one disaster to the other. So there is healthy fear that makes us stop, look, when we cross the road, for example, we get to the stop sign and we realize, or the pedestrian crossing, and we stop, we look around, we check out, we scan the peripherals, we make sure it's safe before we take the first step. So some fears are healthy, I don't have a good feeling about this, but other times it is an irrational fear, or it's not based on any form of reality. And to act upon those fears can actually create further harm. So, for instance, somebody that's got a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia or whatever, depending on how far they are in their healing journey of recovery, they are often discouraged from acting at all upon any of their fears or delusions, because quite often they are delusions, if not most of the time. A prime example of this might be a person who is in a psychotic state, believing that there are people outside the house hiding and crouching behind bushes and spying on them. What I think is beautiful is, as they get through their healing phase, if you like, they can actually, when you have a conversation with them, and they will say, yes, look, I've got a feeling, I feel like I'm being spied upon. It's just incredibly torturous for them, I might add. And you say to them, so what are you going to do about it? I have actually, I don't think this is promotion, but I have actually turned around and said, well, do you want to go outside and check, or do you want me to go outside and check behind the bushes? And I love the fact when they have got to that stage where they can turn around and say to me, don't be ridiculous. The psychiatrist has told me that is not something that I do or should do, because that feeds paranoia, and I don't want you going out there looking around the garden bed in the middle of the night either. I love it. I love it when it comes to that stage. So there is that recognition, and once we can recognize that there's a difference, then we can work with it and healing can occur. So I guess this is what I'm putting to you, that there is this emotional reasoning there. This is how the clinicians put it forward. I would just add as well that emotional reasoning sounds to me a little bit like emotional rationale, where people will act in the heat of the moment, because I've been in very interesting situations, and it's quite funny. I know that people that are watching this channel and listening to me will think, but I thought you were a spiritual person. They're always kind and they're always this and that. And yeah, well, we're human too. But the other factor to this is that sometimes in the nature of the jobs that we're doing, sometimes you actually need to really keep a tight rein and check on your emotional responses, especially if it requires a compassionate outpouring. And this is because when we're stuck in the emotional space and in that brainstem, which if you looked at the anatomy of distress, you will see there is that brainstem reactive response. If there is a real threat or a really significant incident, you have to keep your calm in certain situations. And the first thing that I can think of is basically when I was working and a guy died at the workplace and I was the first responder. Now, I'd never been around a person that was dying before, and the guy ended up dying in my arms. It was just one of those things where I had to keep it together because his family was hysterical. My knee-jerk reaction was actually that I had children present that I managed to get to stand out of sight, I had hoped, while I attended to the guy. So initially my first reaction was mother protection, but I was at work at the time and my children weren't meant to be there. So I stepped into work mode and somehow I was able to function, do what I needed to do, call the ambulances, tried to do, help the guy as he transitioned, provided emotional support to his wife was there and grieving and that kind of stuff. So the point I'm making is that if we allow emotions to dictate our behavior, then we lose capacity to function. And I actually believe, as somebody that likes to think of themselves as spiritual, that my function and purpose is to help people and to help them achieve the best of what they can be. So I try to keep my calm in a crisis. But I will say, when I get home, I'll do a fall and collapse. It's not beyond that. And certainly when that guy passed away when I was at work, I did go home and I had a little bit of a meltdown, as you would do, as is the normal process. But anyway, enough of that. Moving on to the next slide. So when it comes to the unhelpful thinking style of magnification and minimisation, this is actually really quite interesting on both sides, In many ways, it's the drama queen versus the not so dramatic queen. When we magnify, of course, this means that we take a disproportionate look at whatever events that have triggered us. And it could be as simple, it just is, it makes things bigger than Ben-Hur. One of the things that I found helpful, there was a book years ago, which is to ask yourself the questions, okay? So when you're in this reaction and it's the end of the world, oh my goodness me, it's just so dramatic and so awful, is asking myself, is the outcome of this situation going to change the face of the planet? What kind of outcome is going to be the result of this problem? A prime example of this might be, it's not necessarily going to be helpful for people that have got obsessive compulsive type disorders, because the thinking style, the understanding, the awareness of it actually will be helpful, but people with these kind of conditions are going to struggle with it a lot more to change this thinking. It's going to take dedication and commitment, because they're so easily triggered by the small things because of whatever the underlying cause of the issue is. I'm beating a little bit around the bush here, so I think what I'll do is I'll draw on personal experience for this one. I had a friend who was ex-military and who had done combat. So with respect to any viewers that are return service people, I know they're going to understand where I'm coming from with this. But the bottom line is that they are trained. One of the servicemen had explained to me that the reason why it's problematic for a lot of returned servicemen, and they become the small things become bigger than Ben-Hur, is because they're actually trained to identify and to see these little things that are out of place, and they are highly attuned to it when they come home. And that could be as simple as a leaf being out of place on the veranda. They're going to notice it and they might react to it. And it's because they're psychologically geared to notice these small things, because these small things can represent a present danger or a life-threatening risk to them if they're in a combat zone. Look, I may as well actually just be completely honest. It was an ex of mine, a partner. The relationship didn't go the distance. But what I always found was that if he had to go away for work and when he came home, I was complaining to another guy who was a returned serviceman as well. And I said, it doesn't matter what I do. I said, the house can be spotless when he gets home. And I said, and when he walks through the door, because we can't control the weather, there may have been a leaf have fallen off a tree and blown towards the back door. And as he's walked in the door, the leaf has come in with him, but he's walked off in one direction, the leaf has gone off in the other direction. So when he does, because his routine, it took me a while to work this out, his routine was actually to walk around the house and make sure everything was as he expected it and as he left it to be. So he would walk into the kitchen and the first thing he would notice was a couple of things. One, if I hadn't put the plastic bags away with the shopping, and two, if there was a leaf on the floor. And it wouldn't matter if I said to him, listen, you brought that leaf in, the leaf was there and it was out of place, and it would result in these massive, great big reactions to this item being out of place. So what I used to say before I actually understood the nature of the problem for him, as explained to me by the person that was an ex-military person, was that was the world going to come to a stop because there was a leaf on the floor? And just because there was a leaf on the floor didn't mean that I'd been neglecting the house, But anyway, for him, within the context of where he had been, yes, a leaf could represent the end of the world for him, or the end of life as he knew it. But when he's home, it doesn't. So for him, his challenge was to recognise that he was no longer in a war zone and he was safe at home, and a leaf didn't indicate that there was going to be a threat. Within my context, it was a case of recognising that actually he was working to, I'd like to believe that he was working to modifying these really enlarged behavioural reactions to the triggers, which could be quite small. So that's a really good example of magnification. Minimisation is actually represented by me turning around and going, well, is it the end of the world? I'm minimising his experience within that without even being aware that that's what I was doing. And to a large extent, invalidating the discomfort that he had. But this is all part of the learning that we get. So I've just said what magnification looks like on a personal level. Minimisation is, if we're doing minimisation of our problems, it can tend to invalidate ourselves. Okay, so if we have been through a lot of life challenges, I'm just trying to think how to explain this. Basically, instead of using the binoculars are a really good image here. and if you've ever held a pair of binoculars, this should make sense to you. When we're magnifying something, of course, we're looking through those binoculars and everything seems bigger than Ben-Hur. When we're minimizing it, we're turning the binoculars around and we're looking the other direction. Everything seems smaller. So what happens when we actually have the thinking style of minimizing? We're ignoring the positives about ourselves. So we're invalidating ourselves. We discount our strengths, I guess, as not being important. And we might even water down the positive experience and even try and transform them into negative ones. It's as though there is a level of humility involved with putting ourselves down. And that's not helpful either, because all that does is compound a low opinion, I guess, of ourselves. Whereas if we can actually look with that realistic vision in proportion and see our strengths and admire ourselves for our survival skills, that becomes part of a healthy self-esteem. Personally, I think that's a balancing act, because depending on who you're talking to and depending on what your experiences are, some people just can't get a grasp of it. So, actually, do you know what? I'm going to use another experience, one where I actually believe that I had a proportionate image of something that I'd done, my own personal achievement. It was actually studying social work, getting my degree and qualifying. I think, gosh, how old was I when I qualified? Probably, I think I'd be pushing about 49 by the time I got my degree. And it took real effort. I can tell you, I was obviously a mother. I had family responsibilities and grandmother, and, just the fact that we're living and working and all the rest of it. And I can say without any level of puffery or downplaying that was, for me, a real personal achievement to see that through to completion. It took a lot of self-discipline to not give up, because one, you've got to unpack and take a really close look at yourself. There's that. There's a lot of personal development, because once you start looking into those levels, it offers explanations around the life path. And in fact, apparently it's very common for mature age students to drop out of university study for a number of reasons, okay? And it doesn't matter what course you're studying, we will give up. Quite often we will give up. So there becomes this series of, really striving to push on through. Anyway, where I'm going with this is, for me, I recognised that actually it was an achievement to get that piece of paper. It took a lot of self-discipline. It took me longer to complete the degree. I had to take some time off at different stages. But at some point in time, once I got the degree, I was hoping that actually people would recognise and realise just how much effort it takes for a mature age student to complete their studies. But most people, unless they've tried it, they just don't realise. And one of the classic cases was, I had an auntie and I was talking to her about how I was going to do a Masters of Counselling. And I thought she had my back, but she started laughing at me. You've got to have a sense of humour with this stuff as well. She was laughing and she said, "Oh my God," she said, I can just see you typing away and studying." She said, "As a geriatric," she said, "doesn't there become a point in your life when you decide that you don't need to study anymore and that you don't want to?" And I thought, oh my God, she doesn't get it. You know what I mean? She doesn't realise at all. She doesn't see that it was an achievement for me to complete my degree. She looks at me and thinks I'm a joke, actually, for doing it. And within that context, it's like, okay, well, actually, that's a bit of gaslighting if we really wanted to get into it. But the point being that, okay, I'm not magnifying my achievements there, but I'm also not going to allow other people to minimise my achievements. I know what was involved. I'm proud of myself. I'm not going to downplay it. I'm not going to water down that part of my life experiences. But there are other parts of my life that I've downplayed. And people don't realise that you're downplaying anyway. You know what I mean? But I call that keeping my private stuff private. I am, as with many people, I think we do actually tend to underplay a lot. And if I was going to say I've got a fault there, I think that's probably it. I probably need to stop minimizing my experiences because, yeah, it's definitely not helpful. Anyway, goodness me, I'm really sharing today, aren't I? But I'm sure that you guys can relate to it as well. So I hope I've made that clear just by drawing upon personal experience, actually. Right, so that's it for today then. I'm going to call it to a close today. I'm going to say that we've actually finished up this series. You can do your research on core values yourself. Next week, I look forward to doing something totally different and stepping away from things like cognitive and emotional information and content. I actually really would like to get into the meditation type stuff. And some more of the energy work videos. So I encourage you to take a look at the Sunday video, the yarning one, and just find out what I've got on the radar coming up over the next week or two. So in the meantime, I'm going to love you, leave you, say thank you very much for being part of my journey. I hope the content is helpful. Have a wonderful day, blessed week. Take care. Bye-bye for now.